The yesterday that is in a large part responsible for what America is today was created by what has come to be known as the Greatest Generation. Most of these folks came directly or indirectly from agrarian backgrounds, raised by a mother and father, both of whom lived in the home and who relied on the duties of one another to provide for the survival of themselves and their children. And the children, in turn, were needed and expected to contribute to the family's survival. As this generation of children grew, their culture was thrown into shock through the Great Depression. And the consequences of this financial crisis permeated every home and occupation in America, resulting in more expectations from the Greatest Generation. These demands deepened and broadened the character of this special group, developing such qualities as hard work, selflessness, and endurance. For much of the country, the troubles of the Depression were compounded by the Dust Bowl, a time when the livelihoods of many farmers and ranchers was literally blown away. And now the Greatest Generation had to learn acceptance, patience, and faith. However, these challenges were no match for the biggest test their country and the world has ever known, when the egos of men named Mussolini, Hitler, and Tojo raised hell and fury on the people of our planet. And once again, the Greatest Generation put the future of our country on their shoulders and took the responsibility for our freedom, and in doing so, became courageous, ingenious, competent, and bold, deepening their already rich character.
To troops in the field, USO brought the towns of Canteen.
With the war won, it was time for the Greatest Generation of men and women to rest. But many of these folks, instead of returning to their agrarian roots, moved to urban areas, with the men taking jobs with many of the companies and factories that were developed during or because of the war. So now, instead of working for themselves from sunrise to sunset, season to season, they worked on a company's time schedule, trading their own time and independence for securities they'd never before enjoyed, like insurance, pension plans, and Social Security. Women benefited from the strides made during the war too. Refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, dishwashers, washing machines, and dryers came into being, relieving the women of some of the burdensome routine duties of housekeeping. And in this period of rest, the men and women of the Greatest Generation produced millions of babies, referred to as baby boomers, of which I am one. As such, I am conscious of the high standards, expectations, quality, and character that my parents had because I was raised by them. And I have a high regard for those virtues because they were instilled in me. I haven't had to become those qualities to the degree that my parents did, but I recognize them in others, and I know when I do not live up to them myself. See, when children of the Greatest Generation were raised, both parents lived at home with the kids. Our fathers were expected to have jobs, and most of them worked outside of the home, but they worked. And our mothers were expected to work in the home and be there if the kids needed them, and they were. Most people in America and every person that I knew shared in the belief of this paradigm, which was anchored by the character of the greatest generation. And because people shared these values, my parents were not afraid of our neighbors, our friends, our community, our world. Therefore, neither was I. And this trust in our fellow man produced an incredible amount of freedom in our lives. Imagine, because this really wasn't so long ago, a time when there was hardly any crime, virtually no lawsuits, no daycare, low unemployment, and comparatively little government assistance. If someone was on welfare or if they filed for bankruptcy, they were ashamed. If your check bounced, that business put your name on a list labeled bad checks, and then they taped it up for everybody to see. Word got around, you were publicly humiliated, and many times that ended the problem. There was no shortage of water. Most of America carpooled, so traffic wasn't a big deal. Now, people didn't live as long as they do today, but seldom did you ever hear of anyone having cancer, and you never heard anything about Alzheimer's or dementia, or the plethora of diseases and illnesses that are always in front of us today. Times were not perfect, but they were darn good. I was blessed, not because I was raised with money, but because I was raised by parents of the greatest generation, and they were incredibly responsible.
This nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, himself a hero of World War II, had plenty of people who wanted him dead. The CIA, the FBI, Russia, the mob. And on November the 22nd, 1963, he was shot and killed in front of hundreds of people while traveling in his motorcade as it drove through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. Later, former Vice President and now the President, Lyndon Johnson, appointed the President's Commission for the assassination of Kennedy. The commission was headed by then Chief Justice Earl Warren, and it was instructed to determine who was responsible for Kennedy's audacious and tragic murder. The following year, the Warren Report was released to the public, citing Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone gunman responsible for the assassination. No one believed it. I vividly recall the shift in the attitude of our culture. In retrospect, what I was sensing was that the bright light of hope, enthusiasm, and confidence of the greatest generation for all that they had survived and fought for had been irreparably darkened and sullied by a tacit realization that others were in charge, and the others were not them. And as I recall, the vibrancy and joy from the soul and the hearts of the people of our nation fell flat until a new, topical, exciting and stimulating energy arrived when the Beatles landed in the United States in February of 1964. By the mid-1960s, many baby boomers were growing up or had grown up, and this group was no longer content with surviving and having survived as their parents were, because this new generation, the progeny of the greatest generation, was thriving. The products, services, and opportunities that had come on the heels of the war were all there for the taking, but it all cost money. So now Dad worked harder and longer, but still he couldn't keep up with the prosperity and the blessings and the choices that had come to our country. So the answer seemed to be that Mom too would go to work outside the home, which was welcomed by lots of women, including my mom. Women were anxious to financially contribute to the home and to engage and express their talents and skills in the workplace.
Well, I support the women's liberation movement totally as I understand it.
Some of it I think is far out, and I think that those people who are far out do a disservice to it.
My opinion of women's lib, I'm against women's lib, basically. I feel that that women are better off at home, especially the economic conditions the way they are today.
I don't want to be liberated. I like being a mother and a housewife.
Makes a lot of sense to me because in a lot of cases, women just aren't given much respect, you know?
I think it's great, and I think it's getting a lot of women together and getting them out of the houses.
No thanks. I wouldn't give them a break.
Well, I really strongly support it.
Why should the woman always cook and why she should always, wash dishes? Men could do that.
Well, I'm not belonging to it.
That's all right.
I'm very sorry I don't like it.
And many other developments happened at or around this time. The pill was now readily available for women, and anti-Vietnam demonstrations were rampant. But in my opinion, nothing had a greater impact on our culture than the woman working outside the home. No one is blaming anyone, because any country that has experienced the prosperity and the blessings like the United States would be going through the same cultural and paradigm shifts and challenges that we are today. We simply could not know ahead of time the consequences of our own evolution. But when both anchors, Mom and Dad, had to start working outside of the home, the safekeeping of the home began to change. We did not know, nor did we understand, the depth of the problems that ensue when infants, children, or adolescents are not supervised and guided continually by someone who is available and cares about them in their own home. And when those children are raised without supervision, many of their children will be raised without supervision. So the degree of the sense of responsibility, the measure of the values and standards of the parents are not seen or experienced by their kids, so they're not passed down. And with each generation, they are diluted, and the culture will soon reflect this. Our culture reflects this now. And when parents do not raise or refuse to take responsibility for their children, institutions step in to take care of the kids. And when the raising of the children is handed to someone or something other than the parent, it comes at a cost. When that cost cannot or will not be paid with money, it is paid with freedom. In other words, if you can't or you won't take care of your responsibilities, then something or someone will do it for you, but in return, they will tell you how to live. When I graduated from Oklahoma State University in 1978, there were 3 women in my sorority that were majoring in computer science. I had no idea what that meant, and the only thing I knew about computers is that you had to keep them in a cool environment, and they used these little cards with holes in them. But by 1985, I'd purchased a personal computer network system for my employees, which I paid for largely by charging others for the use of my fax machine. Now, much of our nation and the world is inextricably connected to the web by the internet. One web, one internet. This huge highway of information and interchange enables us to speak face-to-face with people all over the world. With computers, our cars can drive and park for us. If we're ambitious enough, we can competently do for ourselves much of what we used to pay others to do for us. We can retrieve answers to almost any question instantly. Work from virtually any location, and so much more. In many ways, it's just a fun time to be alive, because almost, if you can think it, you can create it. Without a doubt, the computer has jerked the course of the world, largely through the advances of our nation, onto a fast track of change and adjustment. Consider just a few of these developments and their implications. Yesterday, we typically conducted business by going to the business, but today we can often just visit the business's website. Yesterday, we picked up information by picking up a newspaper, a book, or a magazine. But today, our personal computer can retrieve almost any source of information we need. Yesterday, we traveled to business meetings and to conferences, but today, we can Zoom. Yesterday, we attended a college or a vo-tech. Today, we can get many degrees online. Yesterday, we built offices, rooms, shelves, and cabinets to store files and records. Today, we archive volumes of data on computer chips the size of the tip of your finger. Yesterday, we entertained ourselves with movies, activities, television, and games. Today, our personal cell phone can entertain us when we want and how we want. Science, transportation, communication, exploration. Many things in each of these areas originated and or advanced in the United States, and these developments have resulted in comforts, conveniences, services, and abilities that no country has ever experienced. In fact, our commerce and industry has developed so much, so fast, that at times it feels as though they're bursting the seams of our current institutions and paradigms. No nation has ever been as blessed and prosperous as the United States of America. Any virtue, when brought to its extreme, can also be a fault. The extremes of the extraordinary hard work, independence, innovation, and discipline of the people of our nation started to reveal their weaknesses decades ago in the places where our nation's phenomenal growth began.
If you're anywhere near my age, which is 51, then you grew up in an America that has all but disappeared. When I was a boy here in Houston, Texas, I used to take my bike and my air rifle and go exploring and shooting along what we call Buffalo Bayou. The bayou is still here, but it's a different Houston, a huge and spreading city, 7 times the size of the place where I grew up. From downtown out to where I lived on what was then the western edge of Houston, it was a streetcar ride through patches of woods and prairie. But in this time, we've gone from streetcars to moon-bound spacecraft. But this has been a half-century of transformation almost beyond belief. There's been a massive growth of power and prosperity in the United States. This country has risen to preeminence in the world. And in the process, we've changed from a rural and small-town nation to an urban society. When I was born, more than half of the American people lived on farms or in country towns. Today, almost 3/4 of us live in the cities or the metropolitan sprawl around them. But while we have been preoccupied with growth and change and power, in a sense, while our attention was elsewhere, somehow, somewhere, something has gone wrong in these cities of ours. It has taken spasms of riot from coast to coast to make us aware that this nation is caught up in an urban crisis.
53 years later, this urban crisis has only gotten worse, and not just in Houston, Texas. Crime, traffic, pollution, lack of water, rioting, the high cost of living, the homeless situation, and more. If you think about it, nearly every social problem that consumes our media headlines is due to the congestion of cities. Too many people in one spot. And today, the stress and tension from all these chronic issues is exacerbated by some recent acute problems, like the enormous influx of illegal immigrants into our country. It's never been higher. The realistic consequences of having only one ultimate source of information and one primary interest holder of most of the disseminators of that information. The recent threat or option of changing forms of government and all that that entails, from a democracy to a socialistic country or even more extreme Marxism. Today, unemployment in our nation is the highest it has been in decades. Today, our inflation is the highest it's been in over 30 years, and it's growing. Today, we've survived a pandemic only to be told that another is on its way and that the origin of both is in question and that their consequences may be untenable. Today, we hear mixed signals on almost every issue from every media. And today, we are having many second thoughts on trusting the authorities and the institutions that we have had faith in for years. Anything taken to an extreme destroys itself. And many of America's cities have now reached their point of maximum potential. Yet many Americans stay in metropolitan areas because they're tethered by their work, or they can't imagine an alternative. So, like rats packed in a cage, Americans scramble and scratch, settling for a life with very little space, little if any free time, and seldom any privacy. And though technology has helped give us something of the independence we want, it has come at the expense of the interdependence we need. There is a phenomenon in nature that is recognized by many scientists and animal biologists that is commonly referred to as a dispersal mechanism. It is most often found in the male of species, and it is engaged when their former environment has reached its maximum potential in population and resources. Leaving what is known for the unknown, animals have been known to travel hundreds of miles to form new homes, and if they survive, somehow others of the same kind follow. This is nature. Is it too far of a leap to suppose that this compulsion may be in humankind as well? Is it too far of a leap to suggest that this unction may have been overlooked, overridden, or delayed due to man's reasoning or his fear? Things like, it doesn't make sense to leave what I know. What would I do? Where would I go? Between two coasts, found down roads less traveled, hidden between the shadows of mountains and canyons and cliffs, overlooked in the wide open spaces, there is the America that many have forgotten and many more never knew. It's small town America where the intimacy of community is treasured, hard work is rewarded, living is safe, water and air are clean, and fun is simple. It's an America that was abandoned for the corporate, exploding, and exciting life after World War II. It is an America that held on and waited for us to come home. Can you imagine the pillars of America's huge metropolitan areas? Just envision these leaders. They're the tax base of the cities. They're those that work hard, they participate, they're innovative, they're very generous, and they donate their time, no matter what their income or their vocation. Those that have worked years and years to support their family and their community, and they suddenly realize that what they're doing, how hard they're working, how much they're making, how much they're paying, how fast they are going, they suddenly realize that it will never be enough. Well, this is already happening, and many of these folks are dispersing. They're leaving the cities and they're migrating into the heart of our country, a land open and wide with arms outstretched, waiting for the hearts of her people to return to their souls. But this isn't a one-way journey, for we have much to bring with us this time. Innovation, imagination, resourcefulness, intelligence, and technology, and perhaps most importantly, the idea of what we want, because we have first-hand experience and knowledge of what we do not want. We want to build a new America. This new America, it must be built on truth and honesty, or it's not going to last. It must be a land rooted in the same spirit and values that created us, so that we're able to support the country and the people that we are capable of being. We're poised to create a new America that is free from the paradigms that have enslaved us. Only our nation can do this. Only America has the infrastructure and the technology at this optimum level. And only America has the creativity, the inspiration, and the resourcefulness that our freedom has given us. We have what we need to create a new country that is home to the people that we want to be. Now imagine what this might look like. American spirit, freedom, and technology is subsuming the need for dozens of traditional businesses, buildings, and institutions. Imagine how life opens up when just a few of these out-of-date, ineffective boxes of confinement are put to rest. Currently, Americans are taxed at federal and state levels for the highways, roads, and bridges used to travel across our country. What if we didn't pay this tax, but instead engaged in a pass system where every road at its beginning and end had a monitor that charged you for the use of that road? The use of the road then determines the income of the road, which decides the priority and extent of the repairs and improvements of that road. Small passes attached to cars are read by computers that register the road's use. This technology is available today, and it's used today on many byways built to circumvent more congested routes. Today, all state departments of education defer to the federal Department of Education, and all public education is funded through the property tax of America's citizens. Anyone who owns property pays this tax, and private schools and homeschooling are paid by those who use these services in addition to their property tax. Ask parents and educators if they think the current paradigm for education is working, and most will tell you no.
Decrease class size! Decrease class size! Decrease class size!
And with COVID and all the constant and ever-changing demands placed on teachers and students because of it, our current education system is about to blow. What if standards for reading, writing, arithmetic, computer skills, and individual development were established, and the Federal Department of Education was eliminated, and the responsibility for educating children and adolescents through 12th grade was returned to the states, who are closer to the people? What if those states could do anything they wanted as long as their students were meeting or exceeding the required standards? Imagine the innovative ideas communities and states would generate. The state could send the authority for educating students to each community. Well, there could be private schools, homeschools, neighborhood schools. States or communities could keep or eliminate their property tax, or raise it or lower it. Teachers could set their own wages by contracting their skills with homeschoolers, private, public, or neighborhood schools. Apprenticeships, field trips, exchange programs, contests, fairs. These could all be ways that communities or states used to teach their kids ways to meet or exceed the education necessary through 12th grade, and to teach them to think and to create. There is perhaps no business that needs to be overhauled in the United States more than the news and entertainment, which has arguably become one industry. The entertainment business seems to have hidden agendas, and to a large degree is spearheaded by actors and producers with questionable ethics, morals, and intentions, who for the last several decades have promulgated a great many dark, sad, violent, and evil productions. Hollywood and the likes, it would seem, doesn't even want to be happy, and judging by the character of a great many products that they're feeding Americans, their misery wants company. And the news? Television news is propaganda. It's a joke. Traditional news sources are losing subscriptions and viewers at record rates. And social media filtering can affect the integrity of the information presented, and in lots of cases renders it suspect. And what if we had an information platform that would not sell out to Google? And what if this platform would not take political stands? What if communities, no matter how small, became their own ultimate news source, meaning that they got their news information much closer from and to the people? And what if larger news outlets like county, regional, state, and national papers and magazines subscribe to these smaller community news outlets? Subscribers become the media, and those that submit the news are directly accountable for its integrity. What if networks, as we know them, dissolved, disintegrated, and instead turned their facilities into production studios for those that they used to control? So suddenly, news shows like Lou Dobbs, Bill O'Reilly, and others that have been censored from mainstream media would rent their production services from these former networks and receive their income from subscribers like you, like me. Then we would determine what we receive in lieu of being relegated to what we are fed. Traditionally, Americans have assumed that the comedians, singers, actors, and other entertainers that are given media and cinema exposure must surely be the best of the best. But through shows like The Voice, Dancing with the Stars, and others, we've come to realize that another Barbra Streisand or Robert Redford just might live next door. We've become aware that considerable talent is all around us in our own communities, among our neighbors and friends. And thanks to the computer, these folks now have the capacity to share their talents and to market their talents without the need for bright lights, foreign money, or questionable intentions. This is a map of the density of population in the United States today. The darker color, the heavier the population. The lighter the color, the fewer people per square mile. On this map, it is easy to see how people have congregated to the metropolitan areas. But you can also see how quickly the population drops, therefore the space increases outside of these darker areas. What this means is that Americans have the best of both worlds, but many may not know it. Because often within 100 miles of urban areas, Americans have the benefits of living in the country or a smaller community. Yet they still have, most times within an hour's drive, the advantages of metropolitan areas. Our founding fathers put the power and authority of our country in the hands of our people. And in the beginning days of the United States, the skills and talents of almost every individual was needed in cities, small communities, and the country. Laborers and craftsmen like the baker, the seamstress, the cobbler, the haberdasher, the blacksmith, the farmer, the printer, and so on. Then, over time, many of these services were subsumed by mechanization and then technology. Many of the corporations and industries that spearheaded these advancements centralized in urban areas, and lots of people were drawn to their employment by various benefits and promises of security, and because there was no longer a way, or a practical and accessible way, for the individual to make and market their own talents and abilities for a profit. Government, corporations, and industries grew to behemoth proportions, expanding in power and money as well. And now, to feed their own growth, they are serving their own self-interests, and in doing so separating the individuals in our country from their inalienable rights. But with technology, we no longer have to work where we don't want to work, nor live where we don't want to live. By leaving metropolitan areas and by creating, making, and marketing our own unique skills and talents, we are diluting these behemoths of their power and taking it back for our own. For the last 25 years, I've taught a number of Sunday school classes and Bible studies. And I'll tell you that people are absolutely starving for the promises of God to be realities in their lives. Things like peace and patience and joy and so on. They want those, but they also know, because the Bible tells us, that these promises are directly associated with the intimacy of our relationship with God. And this intimacy takes time. Time spent with God, time to get to know Him, and time to watch Him work. Time taken to learn to trust Him. So in these studies, people would be hot to trot until we got to the issue of spending time with God. And then they would say, and I heard this a lot, they'd say, well, all that's well and good, but I don't have time. I have to make a living. And that stopped everything cold. Okay, now switch gears just a second. Several years ago, in the parking lot of our church between Sunday school and church, my son and I, and my son who was then a junior in high school, we sat in my truck and we munched on some breakfast sandwiches. And suddenly, in the middle of the chew, John, my son, looked straight at me and he said, "Mom, do you know what America needs?" I said, "No." I was just stunned by this unexpected question from this kid. And then he said, "America needs a major reboot." And then just as suddenly, he went back to eating his sandwich. Well, I've thought of this moment lots of times since then. Partially because it was so unexpected from my son, but mostly because I knew it was true. And mainly today I think of it because I believe it is what we're going through. I believe it's what is happening in this country. Do you realize that the cultural and political mess that we are now in is all man or human made? And it's sure not pretty, but actually it may be a very great blessing for several reasons. But here's two. First, the insidious political government officials and politicians and industries and countries that have for years been taking advantage of the good nature and the hearts of most of the American people in our country are finally being exposed. And they are beginning to be expunged. We Americans, we have known that there was a sinister, wicked, and growing faction in our world aimed at our country. But we had no idea how pervasive, arrogant, dishonest, un-American, angry, and downright evil its followers were until the latter part of 2020. But these rats who have been crawling around in the dark are now being brought into the light and seen for how filthy they are. Secondly, between politics and COVID, We are realizing how much freedom, family, and God means to us, and how we can use technology to facilitate more freedom that can give us more time with our families and with our God. Yesterday, we lived in fear, trapped in man's tick-tock time, pushing, shoving, and striving. Today, in faith, we can choose to live in a place with more space, becoming part of the flow of nature's time, watching her work, aware that she never rushes, yet all is accomplished. America is living through a storm today, but a new day is about to dawn on our country. All things dark are coming into the light. Those of us that know where we have been, can see where we are, and can envision where we can go, are the bridge to this bright future. And we can do this because we are free and we're brave. You know, courage isn't being unafraid. Courage is doing what needs to be done, even if we are afraid. And Americans choose this because we stand on the shoulders of giants. Those Americans like Jefferson, Washington, and Adams, who we know of but we didn't know. To the shoulders of those that we do remember and we did know, like our parents and others of the greatest generation. Americans are those of us that have the spirit of America inside of us. And there's lots of us, and we're not divided, despite what a lot of other people with nefarious intentions would like to make us think. No, freedom and courage are in the bones of Americans. They are in our blood. And we don't live in fear because Americans choose to go forward in faith. That's what makes us different. That is why we're special. And that is why this country, composed of Americans, is the bright light of the world.